Wow, welcome back everybody tonight. Um, Thanks for staying with the series, and I hope you're getting lots out of it. Now, tonight's topic, which is session 17 in the series, is Freemasonry and Illuminati, part 1. And we're going to start today with talking a bit about Agenda 21, its goals, and the problems it presents for us in the future, and also going to look at the sort of origins of the Illuminati movement, its founders, and things like that. As well, I think, as some of its goals going forward. I should distinguish here that there is a difference between the Freemasons and the Illuminati, so we're not talking about one and the same thing, although there are many similarities between them. So, let's start. According to its authors, the objective... Now, I'm going to start with Agenda 21. According to its authors, the objective of sustainable development is to integrate economic, social, and environmental policies in order to achieve reduced consumption, social equity, and the preservation and restoration of biodiversity. In other words, to look after nature. Sustainability advocates insist that every societal decision should be based on environmental impact, focusing on 3 components: global land use, global education, and global population control and reduction. First of all, social equity or social injustice. Social justice is described as the right and opportunity of all people to, quote, benefit equally from the resources afforded us by society and the environment, unquote. Redistribution of wealth. Private property is a social injustice since not everyone can build wealth from it. National sovereignty is a social injustice as well. Universal health care is a social injustice. And this is all part of the Agenda 21 policy. Now, as far as economic prosperity goes, economic prosperity and public-private partnerships, or called PPP. Special dealings between government and certain chosen corporations which get tax breaks and grants and government powers of eminent domain to implement sustainable policy. So these are sort of inside deals, government-sanctioned monopolies, for instance. Now, thirdly, there are local sustainable development policies. Examples would include Smart Growth, the Wildlands Project, Resilient Cities Project, Regional Visioning Projects, Star Sustainable Communities Project, Green Jobs, Green Building Codes, Going Green, Alternative Energy, Local Visioning, the Facilitators Movement, Regional Planning, Historic Preservation, Conservation Easements, Development Rights, Sustainable Farming, Comprehensive Planning, Growth Management, Consensus, and many other kinds of umbrella. What are they? Oh, the groups. They're councils, that sort of thing. All are pushing forward the idea that whatever we do, we have to put nature and the big plan first. Now, who's behind all of this? It sounds good in some ways, but who's behind all of this? The answer is the ICLEI, the Local Governments for Sustainability. They're formally called the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. I notice that it is international. So, whereas a lot of the things I'm mentioning here are American entities, they're also sort of have their equivalents in other countries. Communities pay the ICLEI dues to provide local community plans, software, training, etc. So we would maybe, as New Zealanders, we would pay this international council money, and they would then provide us with a plan and all the software and training involved to make our country conform to these international objectives for a sustainable future. Additional groups include the American Planning Association, the Renaissance Planning Group, International City and Country Management Group. There are the US Mayors Conference, the National Governors Association, the National League of Cities, the National Association of County Administrators, and many more private organisations and official government agencies, all employing lots of people to push forward the same agenda. Foundation and government grants are also given to drive the process forward successfully. So where did Agenda 21 actually originate? Well, the term sustainable development was first introduced to the world in the pages of a 1987 report entitled Our Common Future. And notice it was a United Nations paper. So it was produced by the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development and authored by Norway's President Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Vice President of the World Socialist Party. So notice it's actually a socialist initiative. The term was first offered as official UN policy in 1992, so now it's actually a global policy, in a document called UN Sustainable Development Agenda 21, issued at the UN's Earth Summit, but it's now referred to simply as Agenda 21. So it does actually stay back legally and officially to 1992, with origins coming from the decade earlier. What gives Agenda 21 ruling authority? How can it impose itself over all the local bylaws and laws that we otherwise enjoy? Well, more than 178 nations have adopted Agenda 21, presumably through the UN, as its official policy during a signing ceremony at the Earth Summit. US President George H.W. Bush signed the document for the United States. In signing, each nation pledged to adopt the goals of Agenda 21. This also includes New Zealand. In 1995, President Bill Clinton, in compliance with Agenda 21, signed Executive Order No. 12858 to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development in order to harmonise US environmental policy with UN directives as outlined in Agenda 21. The executive order directed all agencies of the federal government to work with state and local community governments in a joint effort to reinvent government using the guidelines outlined in Agenda 21. So as a result, with the assistance of groups like the ICLEI, sustainable development is now emerging as government policy in every town, country and state in the United States. Now there's some kind of revealing quotes that come from the planners and their planning document, and they include the following. Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. It calls for specific changes in the activities of all persons. Next point, effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all humans. So complete reprogramming, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. This comes from Agenda 21, the Earth Summit Strategy to Save Our Planet, Earth Press, 1993. Next point. The realities of life on our planet dictate that continued economic development, as we know it, cannot be sustained. Sustainable development, therefore, is a program of action for local and global economic reform, a program that has yet to be fully defined. So Agenda 21 is still inventing itself. The local Agenda 21 planning guide was the source of this comment, published by the ICLEI in 1996. And I suppose that's sort of saying that in every country, the governments can interpret the document as they see fit to achieve the document's ends. Next point, no one fully understands how or even if sustainable development can be achieved. However, there is a growing consensus that it must be accomplished at the local level if it is ever going to be achieved on a global basis. And this comes from the local Agenda 21 planning guide published by ICLEI 1996, the same as above. Next point, Agenda 21 and private property. This is the section of the document, Agenda 21 and private property. Quote, land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice, unquote. This comes from the report from the 1976 UN's Habitat I conference and incorporated back into the current document. Next point. Private land use decisions are often driven by strong economic incentives that result in several ecological and aesthetic consequences. The key to overcoming it is through public policy, unquote. This comes from the report from the President's Council on Sustainable Development, the one that was produced by Bill Clinton, page 112. Next point. Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing, are not sustainable, unquote. This comes from Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the UN's Earth Summit 1992. This was the same year that Agenda 21 was launched. And this no doubt would have been part of the narrative pushing for the changes that are to take place under Agenda 21. So we talk here about the reinvention of government. Quote, we need a new collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions, more rapid change, and more sensible use of human, natural, and financial resources in achieving our goals, unquote. This again is a report from the President's Council on Sustainable Development, which was from 1992. From Bill Clinton's thing in 1995. Individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective, unquote. Harvey Reuven, Vice Chairman, ICLEI. There is the Wildlands Project also. Quote, we must make this place an insecure and inhospitable place for capitalists and their projects. We must reclaim the roads and ploughed fields, halt the dam constructions, tear down existing dams, free shackled rivers, and return to wilderness millions and tens of millions of acres and presently settled land, unquote, according to Dave Foreman from Earth First. In other words, undo all the hard work that's been done for the last 50 to 100 years to produce the kind of civilization we know, with roads and dams and electricity and all those things, which do have environmental impact, but to completely undo them, to undo all of the impact. Now, I don't know whether that means that nature can recover to where it was before, because some of the impact may have been irreparable, but they see this at least as the second best option, the best that they can do to repay nature for the damage done. Now, what is it that's not sustainable in our modern society? Well, quote, ski runs, the grazing of livestock, well, that's a big one, the ploughing of soil, wow, building fences, industry, wow, single family homes, paved and tarred roads, wow, logging activities, dams and reservoirs, power line construction, and economic systems that fail to set proper value on the environment, unquote. Sounds like they even want to take away power lines, so I'm not sure what they're suggesting we return to. This comes from the UN's Biodiversity Assessment Report. Now, one of the goals of the project is actually to hide Agenda 21's UN roots from the people. Quote, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society. This segment of our society who fear one world government and a UN invasion of the United States, through which our individual freedoms would be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy, as they would call it, by undertaking LA 21. So we call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth, but not Agenda 21, unquote, from J. Gary Lawrence, advisor to President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development. So they know there's going to be a backlash, and therefore they disguise the name of the movement. They'll call it anything but Agenda 21 and a UN initiative. So J. Gary Lawrence, advisor to President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development. The full article and the videos associated can be found at americanpolicy.org. Now, in this extended introduction, I'll also add the following. Since the time that Agenda 21 came out and opposition did arise, and from those kind of conspiracy theory people, of which I would consider myself to be one, and perhaps a lot of those people listening would also be in that category. There's been a shift, in fact, to push the agenda forward to make it happen more quickly before serious opposition can arise. And there's now something called Agenda 2030, which is trying to, among other things, achieve all the intended population reduction down to less than 10% of the population right now by 2030. In fact, there was a video out that said NASA had plans, all kinds of sort of technical-based plans to get the population down to that figure by 2025, which in fact is only 7 years away. And the Agenda 2030 goals are largely those of Agenda 21. One can see in those goals a high degree of overlap, in fact, with the much older goals of the Illuminati, and one must wonder whether these goals are not, in fact, to some degree, Illuminati-driven. Illuminati goals included, and we're going to look at the Illuminati today after this introduction is finished. Their goals included abolition of all ordered national governments. Now, we already saw in some of these statements before that overwriting local laws and all those things as part of Agenda 21. Another one of the Illuminati goals was abolition of all inheritance rights, abolition of private property. We saw before again that private property was considered to be a source of injustice. Abolition of patriotism, so love of one's country above love of the common good, which is a very socialist directive and ideal. Another one, abolition of individual home and family life. Now that's got to be of some concern if they're going to start pulling the family apart and making children very much wards of the state ahead of wards of their own parents. Another one that's got to be concerning, abolition of all religion. The compromise might be one world religion as long as it's under one control and thereby under state control or under global control. And the Catholics are doing this a little bit now for the New World Order because they're trying to bring all the Christian churches back under the Catholic Church, and indeed to bring all other religions into a partnership with the Catholic Church. But as it stands, the goals of the Illuminati are actually abolition of all religion, and that would include a one-world religion. Another point, imposition of totalitarian Luciferian ideology, and that, of course, is an Illuminati thing. So with our introduction finished, and I must admit that this insertion of the Agenda 21 information ahead of the main topic, which is Freemasons and Illuminati, came late in the piece after the PowerPoint was made, and so the PowerPoint proper sort of starts now. And we're going to start now on Freemasonry and Illuminati, Part 1, with a video, which is going to take about 20 minutes or so. So a warm welcome to everyone. If you've just come in now, come in a bit late. Again, thanks to everyone for staying with the series, and hope you had a great week. That you'll take something away tonight that you'll say, wow, that was worth coming for. And I hope you are enjoying it. I hope you're learning lots. I'm sure many of you know many of these things already, but I hope we can put it together in a way that sort of draws, like pieces in a puzzle that creates the bigger picture that helps us to really understand what's happening in the world and perhaps what we should do about it. So before we move on, let's just remind ourselves of where we've been in these last 16 weeks, because there's a lot actually been talked about. We started out with an introduction and a look at the biblical notions of Messianic King and Kingdom of God. And in that study, we also took a little time to do a survey of the historical predictions for the date of the second coming of Christ, seeing that, there's been prediction of the end of the world at least every 50 years in the history since the church began. At different times, some quite radical action taken by believers, unfortunately in vain. Now, in study 2, we looked at the Pauline concept of one new man, as this doctrine serves as a check on the various dispensationalist doctrines that have come along and greatly confused the Christian world and its understanding of the end times. And that includes the literalism of the millennium and other things that end up producing 3 resurrections and 3 periods of judgment and all these things that really don't make much sense in terms of the theology of the Bible, especially the Old Testament theology. I don't think Jesus came along to create this complicated new understanding of the Old Testament. I think he was basically living completely in accordance with it, just elucidating it. And we have to understand that we shouldn't read the apocalypse, such as Revelation 20, the millennium, literally. It is an apocalypse and it's meant figuratively. So this question of one new man then bounced over into the question of who exactly is the bride of Christ. Is there a bride of the Father, which is Israel, and then a bride of Christ, which is the church? Or does the original bride of God, which was Israel, grow into the bride of Christ in a sense of transition through the new covenant? That wife now incorporates many more believers who are now from the Gentiles, which I think is the right reading of it. We don't read of two marriages in the book of Revelation. Now, armed with the notion that dispensationalist arguments may be rather less reliable than first suggested, we covered the pivotal question then of the rapture theory in 3 studies, studies 4 through 6, and concluded that the rapture theory is unlikely to be a correct reading of Scripture. Remember, we looked at things like coming as a thief, and no one knows the hour of the day, and the he that is taken away in Thessalonians, all those things. So in study 7, we took on Daniel 9, 70 weeks, pointing out that the usual errors in reading the passage and also its unrecognized connection to Paul's discourse in 2 Thessalonians 2. People have missed the fact that the thing that is taken away, the removal, is actually quoting a word in Daniel 9:27 that was wrongly translated as overflow instead of removal. In study 8, we did our first overview of eschatology, spanning the first and second advents of Christ. And in that study, we practiced doing an apocalyptic reading of a major section of the prophet Zechariah's book, which was also an introduction into how the book of Revelation should be read. Study 9 laid another foundational idea in connection to the end times, where it dealt with perhaps the most significant sign of the times cited by Daniel, Jesus, and Paul, which is the appearance of the abomination of desolation, which marks the beginning of the last 3.5 years, not 7 years, but 3.5 years of world history. Study 9 also highlighted the important connection in Israeli thought between temple and Messiah, and the importance of the Jerusalem temple for understanding the prophetic calendar. Armed with the knowledge that the future desecrators of the Jerusalem temple are, with all probability, Islamic invaders, we launched into a reasonably comprehensive study of Islam and investigated its purported and actual historical connections to Catholicism. A series of 6 but then 7 studies on Islam covered a range of topics which included the historical roots of the church in Arabia, the general history of Mecca and the Kaaba, the Fatima cult and Catholic moves to create a common world religion centered around Fatima and the Virgin Mary, the history of Muhammad and his family with the adoption of Allah as the Arabian title for God, the earlier relationship of Catholicism and Islam before there was a break, keys to reading the Quran and understanding jihad, some of Islam's internal contradictions, differing Islamic and Christian standards about scripture, Islamic and Christian eschatological similarities and differences, and reflections on the curious Islamic acceptance of Mariology while rejecting the Trinity doctrine and the universal authority of the Pope. So they've adopted worship of Mary, adoration of Mary, but the other things they've sort of thrown out. So the studies also discussed the looming threat of worldwide Islamic takeover in the 22nd century, or perhaps before, in the absence of any worldwide intervention, if the Western world stays as passive as it has, and how this will feed into Illuminist plans, in fact, for a terrible Third World War, in which populations are decimated worldwide as Western Christianity, as it were, rises against Islam finally, and the surviving society then eradicates all former religions. It's from the ashes of this destroyed society that the New World Order will set itself up, from which the Illuminists hope they'll set up their Luciferian New World Order. So today's session will be the first of 7, some of which will involve simply watching videos designed to introduce us to the Freemasons and Illuminati. And like the studies of Islam, we can't hope to do it in its entirety. There's so much actually in this topic, but we're going to do the you know, the main points that are important really to the prophetic understanding of the Bible. It is these people who hope to engineer a global social disaster, we can call it World War III, and build a, quote, benevolent, unquote, Luciferian society from the ashes of the cataclysm. This group of Satanists is thought to play a major role in directing current world events and may be important in relation to the great apostasy that Paul reports as occurring shortly before the final Antichrist appears. And we already know from the Trump presidency that he's pulling apart all these child trafficking rings, and what lies beneath them, in fact, is a large Satanist network. So we are led to believe that the Illuminati is the overarching body for various secret societies, and in union with an arm of the Vatican, seeks to exercise control over the Freemasonic lodges. And there's some sort of a battle between the Freemasons and the Vatican, and perhaps between the Freemasons and the Illuminati as well, because the Illuminati share more goals in common with the Vatican, I think, than with the Freemasons. YouTube assertions seem to suggest that it has already well and truly taken over the entertainment industry and the majority of media outlets. I'm talking here of the Illuminati. The pathway taken today will be as follows. We will move from the origins of the Bavarian Illuminati in the Spanish Marranos and Alumbrados to its establishment as a society for eventual world takeover, stemming from the earlier objectives of the Golden Dawn and New Atlantis movements. We will compare its socialistic Luciferian goals to the United Nations Program Agenda 21, which we've already spoken of. Illuminati takeover of American society and government has been a goal since the time of Weishaupt, Mazzini, and Pike. It is Alfred Pike's 1871 letter to Mazzini that famously appears to plan out the 3 world wars necessary to overthrow the Christian societies of the West and replace them with a Luciferian New World Order. The Illuminati also appear to share links, but perhaps not full control, over the United States military-industrial complex. There are definitely financial investments there, and therefore a say in what happens. Now, as part of my this sort of large introduction, there was actually also a video involved, and this pertains to just one of the reports about the attempts that are going on to try to assassinate Donald Trump. And I think there are some claims that even the 150,000 cows that have recently been ordered to be culled in New Zealand because of the supposed bacterial outbreak, which apparently is very common to cows all over the world and doesn't even affect the meat that we eat, but that it's come from the Queen, and it's part of a massive occult order for a huge sacrifice, which they usually do. A big blood sacrifice is given before some king or very high dignitary is assassinated. So they did these big sacrifices too when they had lots of animal culling orders that went out before the invasion of Iraq and that sort of thing. So there seems to be a link between these animal culls and huge impositions on the lands of other kings or whatever. And so, these are the sorts of theories, but certainly there was some uncovering of some plots early on in Trump's career, and also the Las Vegas shooting. It was later revealed that the Saudis had attempted an attack on Trump during that event because he was actually in the building at the time. Another one that's come up recently is from Russian spies who are revealing that the Vatican had actually tried to hire the Mexican cartel, a very large, powerful Mexican cartel, to sort out the assassination of Donald Trump as well. So we're just going to have a look at that video for 12 minutes, and then we'll move on to the first of the videos proper in this talk. So here we go.
February 1st, 2017. CIA Russian spies reveal shocking Vatican plot to assassinate Trump using Mexican cartel hit team. This is by Sorcha Fall. Another horrifying report circulating in the Kremlin today is issued by the Security Council. States that of the 6 Federal Security Service operatives arrested and charged with treason for spying for American Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, 2 including Shaltai, Boltai, Humpty Dumpty, in parentheses, Mastermind, Vladimir Anakayev, uh, have revealed under special questioning that the Vatican has contracted with Mexico's feared Juarez cartel to assassinate Freemason leader President Donald Trump. With Freemason leader President Trump still withstanding the brutal and fast-moving coup against him, this report explains these treacherous FSB spies for the CIA have revealed that Pope Francis is following the exact and bloody path of Pope Pius IV, who, during the 1861 to 1865 American Civil War, that cost 2% of the population, an estimated 620,000 men, sided with the rebel forces against President Abraham Lincoln and sent Confederate President Jefferson Davis an autographed picture addressing him with the customary title Honorable, thus acknowledging him as President of our nation, and in doing so effectively recognized the Confederate States of America as a sovereign entity, separate from the United States of America. Not just Pope Pius IV and now Pope Francis siding with those seeking to destroy the United States does history record either, this report continues, but also Pope Pius the 12th, who, while known as Hitler's Pope during the Second World War, aided the Nazis in destroying all German Catholic political opposition, and as secret Vatican files have revealed, as aiding the Vatican in their plans to assassinate Freemason leader President Trump, this report further notes, is the self-acknowledged Nazi collaborator George Soros, who made his fortune by stealing the property of the Jews prior to their being exterminated during World War II, and who today is spending hundreds of millions in his bid to destroy Freemason leader President Trump by flooding the streets of America with pathological, mindless idiots in tactic first used by German psychological intelligence operatives loyal to Adolf Hitler. Unlike the Vatican, that has supported the destruction of the United States, this report confirms the Order of Malta, Knights of Malta, has for centuries protected these Freemason American leaders seeking to keep their nation free, including World War II. General George S. Patton, who decisively defeated these Nazi monsters, thus earning this ancient order of the Maltese Cross as a saint, and that has only been granted 16 times in history, and includes the Knights Templar founder Jacques de Molay, and Saint Joan of Arc, and that Trump has more than frequently praised. In knowing the Knights of Malta's past in aiding American Freemason leaders, this report says Pope Francis became enraged after this ancient order's leader in the United States performed a Knights Templar anointing of Trump during his inauguration as president, thus causing the pontiff to order all Freemasons expelled from the Knights of Malta, firing the Knights of Malta leader and then ordering the full destruction of them too.
In 1961, MGM released a sword and sandal potboiler movie called Atlantis: The Lost Continent. For a vintage movie, it's amazing how after all these years, this movie's plot is as timely as today's CNN headlines. Belligerent imperialist politicians of technologically superior Atlantis hatch a plan to deploy their latest weapon of mass destruction, a crystal laser cannon, to launch a shock and awe preemptive war against the rest of the world's militarily inferior nations, in a brutal campaign to consolidate a one-world Atlantean order. Scientists of Atlantis, preoccupied with transforming working-class citizens and illegal immigrants into a subhuman labor force through mind control and genetic manipulation, fail to heed clear warnings of impending catastrophic Earth changes. Of course, the movie's dramatic climax comes when Atlantis is thankfully swallowed up into the ocean before her sociopathic politicians can launch their evil global assault. Entertaining Hollywood fiction, or is a significant truth embedded in this movie melodrama that suggests a highly advanced civilization once flourished on this planet long before recorded history? And moreover, does the great work of the ages, pursued by contemporary secret societies and fraternities, involve a covert plan to fully restore that ancient lost high culture? Could it be that there is nothing new at all about the New World Order, and that it is in fact a ruthless scheme to resurrect an ancient occult totalitarian order designed to once again reduce the entire human population into hopeless slavery? Evidence of this vanished high civilization is fragmented and scattered all over the world. Yet to reassemble the tantalizing fragments that have been found begins to reveal a glimpse of just how advanced that lost culture may have been. The epic poem of Vedic antiquity called the Mahabharata tells of amazing flying machines called Vimana, powered by Mercury engines that allowed men to visit the stars, and the deadly Brahma weapon that decimated whole armies with a flash of fire as bright as 1,000 suns, leaving survivors to die days later of a horrible sickness described with uncanny likeness to the effects of modern atomic radiation poisoning. Could it be that the great work of the ages has been a meticulous secret operation to preserve the arcane knowledge and science of that high civilization lost in the fog of prehistory, with the intention of resurrecting it yet again as the modern civilization we experience today? By tracing the origins of contemporary secret fraternities and occult societies, we discover Freemasons, Illuminati, Zionism, and even the Nazis derive much of their mystical lore from one common source: Babylonian occultism. Of course, it is from the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, the cradle of civilization, that the origins of contemporary human history can be traced, with the rise of Sumer, an amazingly sophisticated human society that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. According to legend, the Sumerians themselves attributed the source of their wondrous cultural skills, agriculture, architecture, and science, to the teachings of extraterrestrials called the Anunnaki, more specifically to the instructions of Oannes, their ancient god described as part man, part fish. The Sumerian culture gradually evolved into the Empire of Babylon, a word which in itself means gateway of the gods. Babylon was noted as the birthplace of the mother of all sciences, astronomy, and as well alchemical sorcery known as Kabbalah. One of the primary objectives of Babylonian magic was mastery over materia prima, the very fabric of time and space. And it is this key fragment of lost Atlantean technologies, the hermetic secret of materia prima, that has been preserved by ancient priesthoods and after many centuries passed on as the occult alchemy or practical magic still utilized by modern secret societies today. The esoteric knowledge originally expressed in the craft of stonemasonry is based on these traditions. Sacred geometry, which comprised the core teaching of any genuine mystery school of antiquity, was incorporated into the design of buildings that enabled them to function as resonant cavities, which were attuned to the dynamic energies that pervade the cosmos. The basic tenets of sacred geometry were taught in ancient mystery schools in countries as geographically diverse as India, Britain, and Egypt. At the beginning of the 6th century BC, a great portion of the Jewish population was conquered and exiled into Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar, where they would remain for nearly half a century. During this exile, a faction of the Jews adopted the Babylonian system of magic and sorcery. These Jewish heretics rejected the God of the Old Testament because he forbade the practice of magic, and instead embraced the forbidden knowledge of Babylonian mysticism. In Babylon, these heretical Jews, who refused to purge their religion of pagan influences, incorporated into their Talmudic traditions the adopted practices of Babylonian magic. By ancient account, this Babylonian magic was delivered by the Anunnaki into the awaiting hands of the original priestly class. It is a means of occult control whereby we humans are kept in a cycle of perpetual ignorance, like the Ouroboros snake with its tail in its mouth. The Babylonian priesthood thereby served as proxies for hostile aliens to influence the course of human history. Yet embedded within the Babylonian occult Kabbalah were fragments of the secret alchemical science that survived the demise of the high civilizations that had vanished thousands of years earlier. Over ensuing centuries of Jewish migration, these occult Talmudic traditions eventually spread into Spain and Eastern Europe. Jesuit founder Ignatius was born of Jewish blood at Loyola in the Spanish Basque Country in 1491. Serving as a young soldier, he was wounded in the leg at the siege of Pamplona and was obliged to undergo a long convalescence. During this recovery, he became profoundly influenced by the Alumbrados, an emerging occult movement founded by Spanish Marranos, baptized Jews who secretly kept their Talmudic faith. The Alumbrados, who took their name from a Spanish word meaning the illuminated ones, were a heretical secret society of Gnostic mysticism formed by people of noble blood who believed that a person's soul could reach a state of perfection and union with God in their present life, and upon attaining such state they could commit any criminal or immoral acts without staining their souls. From these teachings, Ignatius formed the Society of Jesus, later known as the Jesuit Order, which demanded of its brotherhood a high degree of academic scholarship that eventually earned them great power and prominence within the Catholic Church. Some 200 years later, in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, Adam Weishaupt was born of Jewish parents, but when his father, George Weishaupt, died in 1754, young Adam was turned over to be raised by the Jesuits. His godfather, Baron Eckstadt, was curator of the University of Ingolstadt, and by 1771, 23-year-old Adam Weishaupt was himself a lecturer of canon law at the university. But a significant association with Kolmer, a Danish Kabbalist Jew who had just returned from Egypt, radically changed Weishaupt's life. Kolmer initiated Weishaupt into the secrets of Osiris magic, the Kabbalah, and the Alumbrado movement. Kolmer's occult knowledge made a deep impression on Weishaupt, who later chose the Egyptian pyramid as the Illuminati's symbol of power. It is believed that Weishaupt was recruited by Mayer Rothschild, founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty, whereafter Weishaupt formed an occult group called the Golden Dawn, dedicated to Osiris, the New Age of Aquarius, and the New Atlantis. On the 1st of May, 1776, Weishaupt founded his own Bavarian version of the Alumbrado movement, which he called the Illuminati. After one of their secret meetings, one of their members, Comte de Verrieux, declared, "I can only tell you this is much more serious than you think. The conspiracy which is being woven is so well thought out that it will be, so to speak, impossible for the monarchy and the church to escape it." He later denounced the Illuminati. Upon discovering the anarchist intentions of this order, the Bavarian government outlawed the movement. But nothing was to deter Weishaupt's focused intent. He and his order assumed false names and soon began to cooperate with other Masonic lodges, especially the Grand Orient, in order to infiltrate them. The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in its own name, but always covered by another name, another occupation. By 1794, the Duke of Brunswick, Grand Master of Germany, declared that the Illuminati had gained control of all the Masonic lodges. The stated purpose of Weishaupt's Illuminati was to establish Novus Ordo Seclorum, a Latin phrase for New Order of the Ages, a global program for world domination to be achieved by abolition of all ordered national governments, abolition of inheritance, abolition of private property, abolition of patriotism, abolition of the individual home and family life as the self from which all civilizations have stemmed, and abolition of all religions established and existing, so that the Luciferian ideology of totalitarianism may be imposed upon mankind. Weishaupt demonstrated his adept skill of alchemical social engineering. Far more than a fraternal political movement, Illuminism used ritual occult techniques in order to manipulate the collective social consciousness, to covertly gain power for its diabolical practitioners from the life force energy of the unsuspecting masses. In other words, it engaged in alchemical technique, allowing them to feed like parasites off the latent energy of materia prima. And Weishaupt's successor collaborated on an ambitious plan that would engage this alchemical social engineering on an industrial scale. Giuseppe Mazzini of Italy was a 33rd degree Mason who replaced Adam Weishaupt as head of the Illuminati in 1834. Mazzini appointed America's Albert Pike as sovereign pontiff of Universal Freemasonry and coordinator of the Illuminati U.S. activities. Pike was a Tennessee Ku Klux Klan judicial officer. A known Satanist, Pike indulged in phallic worship and the occult. He wore a satanic Baphomet symbol around his neck and used his bracelet to summon Lucifer. Pike used the KKK to keep blacks out of the Masonic lodges. In a letter to Mazzini dated August 15, 1871, Pike graphically outlined a blueprint for 3 planned world wars. World War I would weaken, topple, and destroy the powerful Tsarist government in Russia. World War II would pit Great Britain against Germany, destroy Nazism, and create the Zionist state of Israel. World War III would be ignited by fueling aggression between the Zionists of Israel and the Arab world, who would eventually destroy one another. Social, political, and economic chaos would then force the masses to accept one world army and one world government ruled by the Illuminati. In Pike's famous Masonic guidebook called Morals and Dogma, he writes, Lucifer, light-bearer, strange and mysterious name to give to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer, the son of the morning, is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not. The great work of the Illuminati blueprint successfully engineered World War I and World War II like clockwork, with each conflict bringing the occult ruling elite one step closer to their goal of totalitarian conquest. Advanced weapons technologies spawned by both American and German physicists during World War II had fully accomplished the age-old alchemical quest to steal materia prima down from heaven and capture it in material form within this world's three-dimensional existence. The power of the atom was harnessed by the United States Army's Manhattan Project during the war, and on July 16, 1945, in an act of wanton technological sorcery, that power was unleashed by the Trinity atomic bomb test in New Mexico. A group of American scientists, led by Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, gathered in a remote area of New Mexico known as Jornada del Muerto, or Journey of Death. There at 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the United States military detonated the first ever atomic bomb. The world had come full circle from the lost civilizations revealed in the Mahabharata, and appropriately, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, the atomic bomb's designer, uttered the Vedic invocation, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The following month, both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, were destroyed by atomic bombs. But mastery over the atom only fueled the occult cabal to secure domination over materia prima on an even grander scale. Following World War II, rumors flourished that the Nazis had secretly developed anti-gravity flying machines, a product of torsion field technology gained from extraterrestrials. And yet, the fundamentals of manipulating materia prima with torsion technology had been fully described by the famed inventor from Croatia, Nikola Tesla, in 1908. Every ponderable atom is differentiated from a tenuous fluid, filling all space merely by spinning motion, as a whirl of water in a calm lake. By being set in motion, this fluid, the ether, becomes gross matter. Its movement arrested, the primary substance reverts to its normal state, stillness. It appears then possible for a man, through harnessed energy of the medium and suitable agencies for starting and stopping ether whirls, to cause matter to form and disappear. At his command, almost without effort on his part, old worlds would vanish and new ones spring into being. He could alter the size of this planet, control its seasons, adjust its distance from the sun, guide it on its eternal journey along any path he might choose through the depths of the universe. He could make planets collide and produce his own suns and stars, his heat and light. He could originate life in all its infinite forms. To cause at will the birth and death of matter would be man's grandest deed, which would make him the master of physical creation, make him fulfill his ultimate destiny. Thus, genius inventor Nikola Tesla explicitly revealed the alchemical secret to dominion over the very essence of primal universal power sought by man since the days of ancient Babylon. Towards the close of 1898 in Colorado Springs, Tesla's research confirmed the Earth to be literally alive with electrical vibrations, which spurred him to design a device that would enable transmission of this power in unlimited amounts to any terrestrial distance and with virtually no loss of potency. Hence, Tesla relocated his research operation to Long Island, New York, where in 1901 he proceeded to construct his Wardenclyffe Tower, the prototype transmission station for this unlimited power source. To fund this ambitious project, Tesla sought monies from his financial benefactor, J.P. Morgan. But when Morgan learned that this project would generate unlimited free electrical energy worldwide, Morgan not only refused to finance the project, he ordered Tesla to immediately dismantle the Wardenclyffe Tower. At this point in the story, most researchers bewail the triumph of robber baron greed over free energy liberation. However, the untold story behind Wardenclyffe was the obvious weapons potential of Tesla's tower. And upon realizing this, J.P. Morgan may have cautiously sought to sequester this technology for future nefarious elitist purposes. In 1908, a mysterious explosion leveled 500,000 acres of pine forest in a remote region near the Tunguska River in central Siberia. The blast was attributed to a meteor, yet it created no crater, and excavations to a depth of 188 feet yielded no nickel-iron meteor fragments. Subsequent exchanges between Tesla and Morgan suggested this blast may have been a practical weapons demonstration of his wireless power transmission project, a precursor of the modern scalar weaponry we know today as HARP. But another variation of Tesla's torsion technology may have been advanced as well by the Third Reich during World War II, with their mysterious top-secret Die Glocke or Bell project at the Risa complex in Poland. This cylinder device generated tremendous torsion field distortion by counter-rotating mercury plasma, yet exactly for what purpose is unknown. While it was argued that the Nazis failed in their attempts to develop an atomic bomb in the closing months of the war, it is also quite likely that they abandoned their atomic bomb research in favor of a vastly more powerful device, a plasma wonder weapon generating more destructive force than even a hydrogen bomb. Whatever its use, the Bell project and its designers vanished just before the end of the war. And yet speculation remains that the Nazis had brought the plasma cosmology of the stars and even the galaxies themselves down to a device as small as a camping trailer, and were using it to manipulate directly the fabric of the physical medium of space-time itself. But ever since the Allied victory in 1945, torsion manipulation physics have disappeared into deeply classified research and development projects far from public scrutiny, thanks to the fascist Illuminati sympathies of American corporate and intelligence interests. The post-war Operation Paperclip installed virtually autonomous Nazi empires into both the CIA and NASA to serve the United States military-industrial complex. Central Intelligence Chief, the former Nazi Major General Reinhard Gehlen, could manipulate Cold War rivalry with the Soviet Union to fuel Wernher von Braun's massive NASA rocket program, both serving as covert fronts to supply vast amounts of monies to finance clandestine physics research in South America, research that likely included the Bell. Skull and Bonesman George Herbert Walker Bush was instrumental in securing secret funding for these operations through his Texas-based Zapata Oil Company by funneling illegal drugs into the United States from his offshore oil rigs, which likely earned him the code name Poppy and later directorship of the CIA. In addition, a major war planned in Southeast Asia would further secure CIA domination of lucrative opium production. But by 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower, upon leaving office, warned of the looming fascist threat of the military-industrial complex. And again in April 1961, newly elected President John F. Kennedy explicitly declared the growing national danger of secret societies.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
During his brief presidency, Kennedy began systematically and single-handedly dismantling Washington's entire occult intelligence operation. Kennedy's intentions were to destroy the CIA, end the Cold War, disengage from Vietnam, and even override the national monetary monopoly of the Federal Reserve Bank by issuing interest-free United States Treasury notes. Thus, to preserve the Illuminati power network, Kennedy's assassination became an imperative, and his murder in Dallas was openly accomplished in classic ritual sacrifice Masonic fashion. With Kennedy's removal, the covert Illuminati money machine recovered its momentum and has been rolling like a juggernaut ever since. But more than a murder of political expediency, John F. Kennedy's assassination was a profound public demonstration that the occult cabal had, as of 1963, secured total national domination. Whistleblower Fletcher Prouty reminds us the lone gunman cover story has come from the lips of every subsequent president and the pop media and their spokesman. They are experienced, intelligent people who are aware of the facts. Consider the pressure it must take to require all of them, without exception, to quote the words of that contrived cover story over and over again for nearly 5 decades. That assassination has demonstrated that most of the major events of world significance are masterfully planned and orchestrated by an elite coterie of enormously powerful people who are not of one nation, one ethnic grouping, or one overridingly important business group. They are a power unto themselves for whom these others work. Neither is the power elite of recent origin. Its roots go deep into the past. One of the profound fundamentals of this Kabbalistic Illuminati alchemy was that human consciousness can directly affect materia prima, and that great power can be gained for alchemical practitioners by manipulating human consciousness and as well through ritual human sacrifice, and Kennedy's murder accomplished both. The purpose of the magical act served to brutalize the American group psyche. The hermetic virus or social idea pattern embedded in Kennedy's assassination is: resistance to central establishment control is useless. Counterculture alternative to such control is counterfeit, emanating from the establishment itself. The total degradation of the planet is unavoidable entropy. The extinction of the human species is unavoidable. The re-inhabitation of the earth by the old gods is our stellar destiny. Thus the unstated great work of the ages Illuminati subtext is to resurrect the ancient high civilization of occult Atlantis. funding for American psychological warfare studies as well as all manner of advanced science, everything from geopolitics, genetics, social engineering to physics, had been established through the empire of money, the Ford, Carnegie, and Rockefeller Foundations. By their influence over the media, these corporate interests could also engage directly in propaganda and other psychological operations. A classic early example of psychological warfare was the 1938 Columbia Broadcasting System's radio version of War of the Worlds, which created accidental and unfortunate hysteria and panic throughout the United States. Listeners tuned in to what they thought was a real Martian invasion. This radio broadcast was funded indirectly by the Rockefeller Foundation through the Princeton Radio Project and guided at every stage by members of the Council on Foreign Relations, including psychologist Dr. Paul Lazarsfeld. Actor Orson Welles, the creator of the program and the news announcer of this infamous broadcast, later apologized for the hysteria this radio show created. Frank Stanton, who later became head of CBS Radio and Television, and Dr. Hadley Cantrell hired Orson Welles to adapt the H.G. Wells classic science fiction book, The War of the Worlds, into a radio drama format in order to study the behavior of citizens under panic conditions. Orson Welles concluded his dramatization with an apologetic disclaimer that it was only intended as a Halloween prank, but to its producers, the program was purposely crafted to create terror. This very first electronic mass media psychological operation was heard by 6 million people, 1,700,000 of whom believed the broadcast to be genuine, and 1,200,000 of whom were frightened enough to take action, either by running away or preparing to fight the invaders. By interrupting what seemed to be a regular music program with a terrifying news bulletin was deemed excessively cruel, manipulative, and deceptive. Allegedly, Orson Welles even received death threats from the Rockefellers should he ever reveal that the unforeseen reaction to this broadcast was precisely what its perpetrators had hoped to achieve and analyze, demographically, psychographically, and statistically. Dr. Hadley Cantrell later wrote a paper entitled The Invasion from Mars, a study in the psychology of panic, which examined the power of the radio broadcast media and its effects upon a population under direct influence of fear. This first electronic stress test was just in time for the dawn of the age of television. Only 2 years later, again with Rockefeller Foundation money, Cantrell established the Office of Public Opinion Research at Princeton. Among the studies concluded by the OPOR was analyzing the effectiveness of propaganda produced by the forerunner of the CIA known as the OSS, or the Office of Strategic Services. During World War II, Edward R. Murrow, also a CFR member, was paid by the Rockefeller Foundation and Dr. Cantrell to monitor Nazi radio propaganda and judge its effectiveness. From this project sprang the FBIS, Foreign Broadcast Intelligence Service, which eventually became the United States Information Agency, used by the National Security Council as its chief disseminator of propaganda after World War II. After leaving CBS, Frank Stanton became chairman of the RAND Corporation, an extremely influential government think tank which researched, among other topics, mass brainwashing of an unsuspecting public through the mass media. Just 4 years after the Orson Welles broadcast, the whole world was at war. In 1941, Military Intelligence Director General William Wild Bill Donovan sanctioned development of an Americanized version of Nazi psychological warfare propaganda techniques, which was defined as full-spectrum dominance over all aspects of a target population's interpretive and decision-making faculties by employing all of the techniques of mass communication propaganda and the all-important component, the calculated application of terror. What better place to test the new theories of psychological warfare than among our native populace, the most turned-on, tuned-in, mentally massaged nation on earth, the United States of America. And after the war, perhaps the greatest Nazi wonder weapon of all, the German invention television, showcased at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, became the primary propaganda Trojan horse that would ultimately invade every living room in America, an insidious tool for domination over the worldview perceptions of our entire society, truly a weapon of mass deception, and the perfect venue for the exploitation of a new scientific technique of opinion molding called the engineering of consent. This mind control program had been perfected by Edward Bernays, nephew to famed psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. During World War I, Bernays had adapted it from German propaganda techniques. Due to negative implications surrounding the word propaganda because of its use by the Germans, he promoted the term public relations, a mind control technique designed to create news in order to appeal to the instincts and fundamental emotions of the public. Bernays cynically declared, "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." And since World War II, the modern myth of UFOs has been carefully crafted by the mass media using these same PR techniques. In July 1947, the United States Army reported capture of a crashed flying saucer near Roswell, New Mexico. On September 15, 1947, just 2 months later, President Harry S. Truman signed into law the National Security Act of 1947, which created the National Security Council and America's first peacetime civilian intelligence organization, the CIA. First CIA Director Walter Beadle Smith encouraged UFO reporting as a means of PSYOPs disinformation to protect existing secret aircraft projects. In the summer of 1952, Smith sent a memorandum to the director of the Psychological Strategy Board outlining the CIA's proposal to the National Security Council, stating the UFO issue presented clear implications for psychological warfare. Smith went on to state, "I suggest that we discuss at an early board meeting the possible offensive or defensive utilization of these UFO phenomena for psychological warfare purposes." It's important to note that Truman's National Security Council has been predominantly managed by members of globalist societies, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, which over the years has included such familiar individuals as Nelson Rockefeller, Robert McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, Allen Dulles, and Gordon Gray, former head of Truman's Psychological Strategy Board. Such notable men form a subcommittee dealing with science and technology, a critical link between the corporate financial world and government-held secret technologies, a control nexus over rocketry, space, alternative energy research, and even UFOs. It is also important to note that when President Truman originally mandated formation of the CIA in 1947, there was no provision for congressional oversight. Pied Piper of the Aliens from Space Gospel was famous UFO contactee George Adamski, who was later dismissed as a con man, and Howard Menger followed suit as a man who copied a con man and whom during one television interview admitted as much. Yet once again, dismissing Adamski and Menger as UFO conmen crackpots is not as simple as it seems, because solid evidence exists that at least these two individuals were acting as part of an intelligence-backed operation. Menger also admitted that he worked for the CIA and that his story was part of an experiment to test public reactions to the idea of extraterrestrial contact, to see how easily and who specifically could be fooled into believing anything. Adamski, who claimed to be in contact with a distinctly Aryan-looking blonde spaceman from Venus, was actively supported and assisted by the CIA for the same purpose. This became known when scientists attempting to discredit Adamski were warned off by CIA Director Alan Dulles in person. And research has shown that during tours of Europe and Australia to promote his message, Adamski traveled on a passport furnished by the CIA. During a 1953 speech, Adamski even calmed an anxious crowd by assuring the audience that the CIA and the FBI had cleared his statements. The idea that contactees, such as Adamski, should have been spreading their message with the blessing and backing of the CIA seems at first bizarre. However, when we consider the very real benefits for psychological warfare purposes of setting up and monitoring such experiments into the way that cult beliefs spread and the influence that they have over certain segments of the population, the motive becomes apparent. In 1917, Marxist John Dewey, father of modern public education in America, stated, "You can't make socialists out of individualists. Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society which is coming, where everyone is interdependent." As well, John Dewey was the first political person to publicly recognize the social engineering potential of a perceived threat of an invasion from outer space when he stated, "The best way to unite all the nations on this globe would be an attack from some other planet. In the face of such an alien enemy, people would respond with a sense of their unity of interest and purpose." In 1955, upon retirement from an illustrious military career, General Douglas MacArthur told the New York Times, "The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the Earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets." Decades later, President Ronald Reagan expressed a similar theme at the United Nations when he said, "In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us realize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world." Dr. Carol Rosin, former assistant to famed German rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, claims he warned her repeatedly before his death in 1977 that a series of events were being prepared to engineer a false flag Armageddon, including a staged alien invasion. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We are going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it is a lie. Henry Kissinger, a member of the Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission, raised suspicions that the New World Order would play the fake alien card in the future when he made the following statement at the 1991 Bilderberg Conference held in Evian, France. "Today America would be outraged if United Nations troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow they will be grateful." These statements span 70 years and 2 world wars. Yet the people who would use the mass media to terrorize an unsuspecting population stand ready again to promote a similar scenario. The radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds may have been a precursor to a grand finale, fake outer space alien invasion. Every year since their first 1954 meeting at the Bilderberg Hotel in the Netherlands, the secretive Bilderberg Group, comprising elite power brokers from Europe and North America, has met to discuss and influence the changing global political, economic, and social landscape. Dotted amongst the usual suspects, Rockefeller, Kissinger, and Soros, we see the presence of renowned Hollywood filmmaker Steven Spielberg, who attended the 1999 Bilderberg meeting at Sintra, Portugal. But what business does Spielberg, a stellar chief of the entertainment industry, have secretly mingling with international bankers, military intelligence, and world political leaders? Since the 1970s, Spielberg has directed or produced 7 of the top 20 grossing films of all time, including the most successful alien UFO films of all time. From Close Encounters of the Third Kind to E.T. to Deep Impact to the TV miniseries Taken, and not the least of these being his own version of War of the Worlds in 2005, all of which depict alien invaders from outer space. Spielberg is clearly a tool of the elite. He has almost single-handedly crafted the national public perception of extraterrestrials, and the success of his efforts may be reflected in Roper public opinion polls that claim 80% of the American population believes in UFOs. Spielberg's involvement with UFO psyops was directly implicated in a document purported to be the transcript of a classified 1980 briefing with newly elected President Ronald Reagan. CIA Director William Casey openly revealed to President Reagan just how a careful psychological program was using the media to carefully craft a public perception of the UFO phenomenon. The first person who helped us with this disinformation program was Mr. George Adamski back in the early 50s. As well, this briefing revealed the CIA supervised all productions of UFO-related movies. This helps the public to keep their minds open, but also allows us to keep our secret aircraft away from the public's knowledge. The first cooperative venture was the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. That was a cooperative venture with the United States Air Force and the movie industry. We provided the basic subject matter for the movie Close Encounters. Reagan's CIA director, William Casey, a former corporate lawyer, later boasted, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." We have been and are being conditioned. It's no strange coincidence that top Trilateral Commission and Hollywood lieutenants like Lawrence Rockefeller and Steven Spielberg have been either funding or fomenting this alien paradigm. That is not to say the entire UFO research field is controlled, but the stranglehold at the top represents elite manipulation and social engineering. The technology to pull off this hoax is in place. The historical precedents are documented. It will only take one declaration from the President, one staged attack on an American city to convince the people of a universal threat, from which only a centralized one-world government will be able to protect us. The empire of money fully controls the mass media, and the mass media fully controls the public perception of UFOs. In other words, threat of an alien invasion offers the ultimate alchemical solution to Adam Weishaupt's original Illuminati goal, abolition of all ordered national governments, so that the Luciferian ideology of totalitarianism may be imposed on mankind. In 2011, National Geographic aired a television documentary entitled When Aliens Attack, which emphasized that the International Academy of Astronautics had developed a draft protocol for communicating with aliens, which was presented to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in the year 2000. The protocol states, "In the case of the confirmed detection of an extraterrestrial signal, signatories of this declaration will not respond without first seeking guidance and consent from a broad-based representative body such as the United Nations. This begs the question, would the mass arrival of aliens in our skies finally secure the submergence of United States sovereignty and national independence to an all-powerful one-world government, the secret agenda of the Illuminati? The fundamental psychological warfare perceptions embedded within the UFO phenomenon are: humanity is helpless, its technology is outclassed, it must submit to the guidance of an alien elite, a master race. With these goals explicitly revealed, the PSYOPs intent of the 1951 20th Century Fox motion picture The Day the Earth Stood Still is perfectly clear: submission to the guidance of an alien elite. Having demonstrated the invincible power of his robot policeman, Alien Klaatu issues his final ultimatum. Your choice is simple: join us and live in peace, or pursue your present course and face obliteration. We shall be waiting for your answer. The decision rests with you. In 1958, Freemason and Texas Senator Lyndon Johnson issued this policy statement on the status of our nation's defense and the race for space. Control of space means control of the world. From space, the masters of infinity would have the power to control the Earth's weather, to cause drought and flood, to change the tides and raise the levels of the sea, to divert the Gulf Stream, and change temperate climates to frigid. There is something more important than the ultimate weapon, and that's the ultimate position. The position of total control over the Earth. That lies somewhere in outer space. Presently, based on extraordinary advances in geoengineering, a new generation of scalar weapons exist, whose deployment can easily be masked as acts of God. The new millennium culture of plausible deniability has secured the technological capacity to wage war by engaging weather phenomena, earthquakes, or solar events against an enemy or its population undetectably. With the vast secret resources and weapons technologies this culture of control now has at its disposal, it has become fully capable of destroying not just a city or a nation, but an entire planet. This occult culture of full-spectrum dominance has become an autonomous breakaway civilization unto itself, leaving the rest of human society dangerously irrelevant and vulnerable. But far more than economic or political or military control, the great work of the high cabal fraternity has now turned its psychopathic obsession for domination over fundamental human physiology itself. This Frankenstein program, innocuously introduced by Freemason Newt Gingrich in 2001 as the Age of Transitions, showcased the National Science Foundation's transhumanist eugenics agenda to establish on this planet a new species of totally controlled, bioengineered humans. Inevitably, the cybernetic enhancement of human performance is sneaking up on society. Dynamic advances in artificial intelligence technology are swiftly replacing human viability in our culture. In fact, the present exponential growth of bioengineering and computer technologies is about to marginalize the human factor altogether. Science tells us that by 2045, humans will become obsolete, replaced by vastly superior artificial intelligence, AI. Chemtrails, degradation of the environment, GMOs, global warming, economic collapse, and transhumanism are blatant hallmarks that Adam Weishaupt's Novus Ordo Seclorum, The new order of the ages is being fully engineered right before our eyes. The full spectrum recreation of old Atlantis, a masterful achievement of alchemical social engineering. But the question remains, why would generations of secret brotherhoods offer themselves as willing accomplices to the degradation and demise of their own nations, their own planet, and even their own species? To participate in such pathological schemes is irrational, suicidal folly. And evidence strongly suggests that occult rituals have allowed ancient alien masters to manipulate their human proxies in a long-term program of preparation for their eventual overt appearance. One of the clever tricks of social alchemy has been to convince the masses that the universe is an empty abyss, a lifeless vacuum wherein our feeble conscious thoughts are utterly powerless and ephemeral. Both of these ideas are manifest lies. The universe is truly an ocean of awesome latent energy. The materia prima in which we exist is the very source of our existence, and this medium can be influenced and molded by human thought. This is the great secret that has been jealously guarded by occult fraternities all down through history, so that a handful of hermetic practitioners can fully hoard this awesome power unto themselves. The alchemy they understand and wield is collective intent, focused and magnified through ritual ceremony. In turn, this focused intent acts upon the medium and then manifests as physical reality. And in truth, this medium can be accessed by anyone at any time. But until the mass population awakens from the mesmerizing sorcery that keeps them powerless, they will never liberate themselves from the clutches of the ancient occult tyranny that has strangled humanity for so very many centuries. But to remain entranced, they likely risk the same doom as did that other Atlantis so very, very long ago.
Now, the assertions made in this video are, I think, as follows. The Vatican used the Muslims to destroy the non-Trinitarian Christians and their Bibles in the Middle East and North Africa. Catholic churches were originally left untouched. This destruction extended into Persia, India, and China. Islam's advance into Western Europe was only stopped by the Polish king Jan III Sobieski. Now, Pope Gregory in 606 AD, there's a picture of him down there, then declared the Vatican to have universal secular power. Many European kings resented the claim and refused to acknowledge the primacy of the Pope. But Constantinople was backing this right of the Pope in Rome. The Vatican later mounted vendettas against those European leaders and some of the non-Roman churches, such as the Orthodox Church in Greece and in Russia, and also later against the Protestant churches who had continued to reject its claim to universal power. Now, later in the 1700s, many of those educated in Catholic universities happened to be Jews. The Jesuits kept an eye open for Jewish and Muslim children who could be educated in the Catholic system and then introduce Catholicism back into their own communities. Now, Adam Weishaupt was one of these children, and when orphaned early in life, his uncle obtained an education for him in the Catholic university. He did extremely well and was fast-tracked through his studies in law and theology. In his early 20s, he was already a lecturer in law at Ingolstadt University and was looking to make a name for himself there at the university. He was a bright boy. But he was a Catholic Jew at the end of it all. But what the university didn't know about him was that his family had kept him aware that his origins were Jewish and that his forefathers had in fact been converted at the point of a spear in the 15th century Spain. As Moranas in Spain, they were Christians who followed Jewish mysticism when nobody was watching, so they had a kind of double life. Outwardly they were Catholic, however. Now the Spanish had a secret society called the Alumbrados, which was founded at around 1492, the year Christopher Columbus sailed to America. It was immediately in danger of the Inquisition. The beliefs as stated, seem quite Gnostic in character, and they rejected much of the ecclesiastical tradition of the Church. The name means illuminated, just as the name Illuminati also does. Its members resented the Church greatly, but kept this quiet and met to discuss Kabbalistic ideas. They were looking at the writings of the Jewish Kabbalists at the time, and the teachings of other religions, including the pagan ones and the ancient ones. It was to this part of his own history that Weishaupt was drawn, and even though a good Catholic outwardly, he was still a Moranas and Alumbrados at heart. In time, Weishaupt decided to see if there was interest in a society that could discuss the Hermetic religion of the Egyptians. His interest was piqued by the Kabbalah on one side and Enochian magic on the other. In fact, there was some overlap between the two, both of which had become trendy again in Europe once the Inquisition had abated somewhat. Alexander D, who was advisor to England's Queen at the time, was also an occultist of this sort, and had his own private society for those inquiring into such things. William Shakespeare is among the earlier followers of D, and Weishaupt came along about a century later with much the same interest. Now Weishaupt decided to form his own society of inquirers and called it the Golden Dawn Movement, based on his rigorous reading of Egyptian religious texts. Later, as he shifted to reading Greek texts, he became infatuated with the story of Atlantis and the ideal republic described by Plato in his book Timaeus. He changed the name of his society to the New Atlantis Movement. The final form of his society would be inspired by the writings that called for enlightenment in Europe and escape from church tyranny. It was the Catholic priest Ignatius of Loyola who first formed the Jesuit order and then the Illuminati in the 16th century. He founded the latter almost as an act of defiance against a church that made sure it still held primary control of the first order he had founded, and would honour him, in fact, with sainthood after his death for his services to the church's cause. The Illuminati, however, was founded so that Loyola could find other people who might join him in a different vision for Europe, as he could see with others that Europe was beginning to lose its patience with Rome. A century later, as Weishaupt observed the power struggles in Europe and could perhaps see the writing on the wall for the Catholic Church, he set up his own version of Loyola's movement in 1776 and called it the Bavarian Illuminati. Joining the order honoured the Moranas in his lineage and cemented his identification with Loyola. Loyola was a Catholic Jew like himself. It was in 1798 that Napoleon carried out the people's will to depose the Pope, and he declared the papacy to be terminated. Many who saw this believed it had transpired because of the conspiracies of the Illuminati. Only a few years before the Bavarian Illuminati was formed, the Jesuit order had fallen out with the papacy, and Pope Clement XIV outlawed the order in 1773. There he is there. Go back a bit so you can see him. He banned the order from all Catholic lands and caused the Jesuits to scatter from Europe and bide their time. Many of the South American Jesuits fled to Italy's Corsica. Some of the Swiss Jesuits joined the newly formed Bavarian Illuminati. But restored as an order in 1814 under Pius VII, the Corsican Jesuits helped Napoleon to power. Napoleon would become an avenger for the Jesuits against those countries that had called for their abolition and served as an agent of the Illuminati for non-Catholic France. But the friendly new relationship between the Jesuits and the Pope was a clever move by the Church, who embraced the order rather than resisting it. By embracing the order, the Catholic Church managed to weather the storm of having the papacy terminated by Napoleon, and also gained acceptance by the Illuminati. So we see here early on that there's a close link between the Vatican and the Illuminati, which no doubt has to some degree always endured. Given that many Protestant leaders were also Masons, and this is still true today, this also became an interesting new way for the Catholic Church to regain some control over Protestant leaders, which was, after all, the original purpose of the Jesuit order, which was to reel the Protestants back in under the Catholic umbrella. This infiltration continued to such a degree that the Freemasonic lodges are now a way that Rome is getting Protestant churches to realign under Rome, with all the secret discussions that take place there. Having said that, there is currently a battle between the leadership of Freemasonry and the Vatican, because there's a great deal of Freemasonry that is actually Protestant-based and doesn't want to go back under the Catholic banner, so they want to keep a safe distance. It's also alleged that President Trump is the leader of World Freemasonry, for those who are interested to follow up that lead. Now, there are also Oriental Freemasonic lodges, which by similar infiltration allow Rome to influence Muslim governments, and many Muslim leaders are actually in that Oriental lodge. The previous leaders of Egypt, for instance, were in that lodge. The Illuminati, and so was what's his name, who was killed in Afghanistan, Hussein, President Hussein, who was sort of hung. He was also in the Oriental Lodge. The Illuminati was founded by Ignatius de Loyola, who, as a Spanish Kabbalistic Jew, gained his ideas from contact with the Alumbrados, which means Spanish version of Illuminati, and he had very similar roots to Adam Weishaupt. So let's recap a little bit. The Alumbrados were a secret society of Spanish nobles, originally founded among the Marranos, the forcefully converted Jews. The Marranos were forcibly converted. They pretended to be Christian, but they secretly followed Jewish or mystical teachings, really, not the typical rabbinical biblical, but the Middle Ages Kabbalistic school that came from the Khazarian Jews. They secretly followed these teachings. And that, by the way, is a picture of Loyola. The Alumbrados doctrine was basically Gnostic. They believed that a person's soul could reach perfection in this life, sort of more of a Jewish idea than a Christian one. Once perfected, the initiate could commit any crime without actually staining his soul, because the soul and the body were somehow separated in their existences. They were just linked for convenience. And because it all had to do with shame and the human, the fact that the sin brought shame, if they could sin without feeling shame, then they somehow had conquered the power of sin over their lives, which was a kind of perverse way of justifying sin. Loyola went on to found the Society of Jesus, which of course we call the Jesuits for short, and it's the duplicity of the Marranos, which is in some ways reflected also in the duplicity of Islam, and the duplicity of Ignatius himself, who founded both the Jesuit order for the Church and the Illuminati against the Church, that largely explains the way that the Illuminati and, of course, the Alumbrados before it and Jesuit orders maintain their relationship. So there is still this kind of link between the Jesuits and Illuminati, both of which Loyola founded, but he founded them for very different reasons, but there is an overlap between them. So both societies outwardly espouse church doctrines, but secretly follow an entirely different set of beliefs, which allows them to operate in a far more spiritually and politically lawless manner. Their denial of involvement in political intrigues is, of course, to be expected, but clearly any admission of conspiracy would have the order disbanded at once, and so they're obviously never going to admit anything like that. Here's a picture of Adam Weishaupt. Looks like a sort of nice fellow there. Now, why was the society even formed? Well, the official version that we'll read about is that Freemasonry came into existence because its founders disliked the Catholic Church and wanted an independent religious system, but it was hardly Christian. The probable truth is that Freemasonry and the Illuminati gave Kabbalistic Judaism a means of propagating its secret political goals in secret societies, while appearing to be subject to the government of a Christian Western society. So there was kind of a shadow government being built across Europe through these secret societies. Now, early in the 18th century, the young Bavarian Jew, Adam Weishaupt, was handed over to Jesuit teachers after his father died. Under their education, Weishaupt quickly rose to the position of lecturer in canon law at Ingolstadt. Meanwhile, Weishaupt's association with the Danish Kabbalistic Jew Kolmar introduced him to Egyptian Osiris magic. And soon afterwards, Weishaupt founded the Golden Dawn movement. It was dedicated, in fact, to the cult of Osiris, which was the chief god of the Egyptians, and the dawn of the age of Aquarius, and the New Atlantis, which were kind of occult goals. These goals were those of resurrecting Nimrod and his empire in a future world, in a sense to undo the work that God had scattered at the Tower of Babel, and in a sense to build a new Babel in a future world empire. Now, in 1776, Weishaupt founded the Bavarian Illuminati, using the pyramid as its symbol of power, and that pyramid, of course, is through his interest in the Egyptian mysteries. The stated goal was to bring about a new world order, which in Latin is Novus Ordo Seclorum, or a new secular order. In the occult, this is also referred to as the New Atlantis. The Illuminati were outlawed by the Bavarian government in 1785, when they discovered by chance some of their plans, and then more forcefully in 1787, where membership then carried the death penalty. Weishaupt lost his job at Ingolstadt and was moved into exile at Gotha in Saxony, where he lectured in philosophy at the University of Göttingen. So he's quite talented. He was lecturing in law at one university and then lecturing in philosophy at the other. Now, the family of the Gothas is actually part of the Queen's family, whose actual bloodlines are Saxe-Gotha. I forget now. Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. So that bloodline is actually in the Queen's line at the moment. So he went there. He was helped by that family. But it appears that the Illuminati, it's got it there. The family of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, who helped Weishaupt relocate to Göttingen, are the family of England's Queen Elizabeth II, who changed her name later to Windsor to sound rather more English. But it appears that the Illuminati continued their work nonetheless, only now shrouding the work in even greater secrecy. They had already forged close associations with the Grand Oriental Masonic Lodge and began to infiltrate it. Now, I should point out here that the Freemasonic lodges were a little bit older, not much older, but a bit older than the Illuminati, and were in a sense a rebuilding, a reconstitution of some of the fallen orders of the Middle Ages that sort of re-emerged in the form of the Freemasons, probably in the 14 and 1500s. And certainly when the Protestant Reformation came along, they grew in strength also. Now, after the French Revolution of 1789, many believed the Illuminati had been responsible for that rebellion, but this was never actually proven. But it was in the same year, 1789, that George Washington became President of the United States, and he was by then already a High Mason. In 1794, the Duke of Brunswick lamented that the Illuminati had, by virtue of having very similar rights, quickly incorporated members from the Masonic lodges, but a good many of these members belonged to both societies. And that's because one of the first members of Weishaupt's Illuminati was also actually a Mason, and he thought that the Illuminati should include many of the Masonic rituals and formats. In the mid-1820s, members of the Masonic lodges and also of the Illuminati were boasting that they were in general beyond criminal prosecution. It's a bit like Hillary Clinton today, as the lodges owned so many personnel in the press, the police, the judiciary, and the government. However, this encouraged a more ruthless element to begin joining the order, who saw it as a way of setting up successful crime syndicates. In Dresden in 1880, the Illuminist movement had become so strong and secret that it decided to declare itself reborn, and did so publicly. However, it's not clear who was in charge of the movement at this time. Today, the Masons have 56,000 temples across the United States, and these will also be a base for most of the Illuminists in the United States. There is some evidence, however, that secret Illuminati lodges operate independently of the Freemasonic lodges, although, as I said, there is some cross-fertilization, some shared membership between the two movements. And it's actually in many of these places, many of these Freemasonic lodges, and also in the Illuminist lodges, that priests and politicians have maintained their anonymity and have a place to meet out of public view and off the public record. In fact, in 2017, Britain published a list of 2 million Freemasons who had served in public office since 1717. So vast has been their presence that many think British history will actually have to be rewritten from 1737 onwards. History is by no means random. Obviously, it's been planned within the Masonic lodges, and the people that have run Britain have indeed nearly all been Masons. And that would be true today also. Only a look at the employment registers of military, intelligence, and governmental staff in the United States shows that about 40% of all employees are Jewish. Now, among property developers and bankers, the number is similar. News agencies and hotels are also largely owned by Jews. In the entertainment industry and among filmmakers and actors, the Jewish percentage is probably well over 50%, and Facebook was developed by the Jew Mark Zuckerberg, who is in fact also the grandson of David Rockefeller. Steven Spielberg is also Jewish, and he is playing his role for the CIA in a way, preparing society to meet the extraterrestrials, as this is one of the great plans of the Illuminists. Whether it goes ahead or not, I don't know, but I suspect it may, as they begin to lose the battle toward the end of the age. Now, such distorted statistics for a particular ethnic group, in this case the Jews, and many people have brought this up and sort of been shot down in flames for mentioning it, but it does hint at a larger social agenda and sort of machinery that's there that is slowly excluding other ethnic groups and concentrating power in sort of one ethnic group. In other words, the Illuminati and the Jews in America are both on the same page and are otherwise perhaps fighting for the same territory and control. Now, we don't know the exact relationship between the Khazarian Jews in Israel today and the Illuminati, but currently it seems they're sort of working in the same direction, so probably are cooperating. Now, because of America's strategic interest in Israel, it's possible, indeed probable, that Jews have been pushed into positions of intelligence deliberately that will be of benefit to the defense of their own country. Now, Israel as an economy is also a curious mix of socialism with capitalism. So Israel can, to a large degree, identify with the socialist goals of the Illuminati. That's probably why they work together quite well. Its capitalist goals serve it in the area of procurement of weapons and defense of the country, keeping some money in the bank for its political needs, shall we say, and to allow foreign entities to operate within Israel but stay almost disconnected from the local economy. But if you lived in Israel, you would find out that a doctor would get paid $1 or $2 an hour more than the nurses' aides or whatever. There's very little pay disparity, and it's very socialist actually in the way it works there. Everybody, by the way, is also pretty poor there, but because it's a shared experience, it doesn't seem so bad. Now, if the threat still continues and is largely hidden within the Masonic lodges, why aren't the lodges outlawed today? Well, the reason is probably because the people that would outlaw them are also members of the lodges. It seems that major Western governments, the political Zionists as some prefer to call them, are now more heavily populated by Illuminati affiliates and members than ever before, and many of these affiliates are also Jews. So not only do we have a cross-fertilization between the Vatican and the Illuminati, and between the Masons and the Illuminati, but there's also many Jews who are connected to the Illuminati. Makes it a complicated sort of a story. Now, the stated goals of the Illuminati are strikingly similar to the modern objectives of Agenda 21, are stated at the beginning of this talk, and one has to wonder whether their influence has not been there to bring out the goals of Agenda 21. The goals include abolition of all ordered national governments, abolition of all inheritance rights, abolition of private property, abolition of patriotism, so you're not allowed to wave the flag for your own country, you have to think of the global state first, abolition of individual home and family life, where children will belong to the state, abolition of all religion, and imposition of totalitarian and perhaps Luciferian ideology, if we do in fact follow the plan of Grand Master of Freemasonry Albert Pike, who wrote the script back in the 1800s for what should happen in the 1900s, the three world wars, and all the consequences of that. So let's compare these Agenda 21 goals under the United Nations to what we've just listed here as the goals of the Illuminati. And for that purpose, we're going to play two short videos, each of 5 minutes, that speak about that.
At its core, Agenda 21 is about control. Control over land, natural resources, and entire populations. It seeks to control the air by regulation of carbon emissions, the ground by sustainable development, and the sea through environmental regulations. Officially stated, Agenda 21 is a comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the United Nations system, governments, and major groups in every area in which human impacts on the environment. Because being human will always have an impact on the environment, Agenda 21 paves the way for extraordinary UN control. When you boil it down, there are 9 basic tenets of Agenda 21. Move citizens off private land and into urban housing. Create vast wilderness spaces inhabited by large carnivores. Eliminate cars and create walkable cities. Support chosen private businesses with public funds for sustainable development. Make policy decisions that favor the greater good over individuals. Drastically reduce the use of power, water, and anything else that creates carbon pollution. Use bureaucracies to make sweeping decisions outside of democratic processes. Increase taxes, fees, and regulations. And finally, implement policies meant to incentivize a reduced population.
This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Finally, implement policies meant to incentivize a reduced population.
The Earth just cannot handle the sheer number of humans who live here. Something has to give. And I believe that it's up to us who have lived a good life to make sure that our children will have the opportunity to live good lives too. I have lived a good life.
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 Finally, implement policies meant to incentivize a reduced population.
Every year, millions of imperfect babies are born. destined for a life of struggle and hardship. But it is the rest of us who pay the ultimate cost. Billions of dollars that could be used to better society are instead wasted on the malformed. There must be a better way, and there is. Agenda 21 is coming soon.
Finally, implement policies meant to incentivize a reduced population.
For millions of years, this lake thrived. But now it is dying. Poisoned by humans who put themselves above nature. It's time to stop the killing. It's time to heal our planet.
Finally, implement policies meant to incentivize a reduced population.
It's time to remove your footprint. Agenda 21 is coming soon.
Controlling our every impact on the environment means controlling every aspect of our lives. What we eat, how we travel, where we live, how we live. But no is still an option.
Agenda 21 is an action plan of the United Nations, the UN, related to sustainable development and was an outcome of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the UNCED, held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in 1992. It is a comprehensive blueprint of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the UN governments, and major groups in every area in which humans directly affect the environment. That means you. The full text of Agenda 21 was revealed at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit, held in Rio de Janeiro on June 13, 1992, where 178 governments voted to adopt the program. The final text was the result of drafting, consultation, and negotiation, beginning, esoterically, in 1989 and culminating, at the two-week conference. The number 21 refers to an agenda for the 21st century. In 1997, the General Assembly of the UN held a special session to appraise 5 years of progress on the implementation of Agenda 21, Rio +5. The Assembly recognized progress as uneven, and identified key trends, including increasing globalization, widening inequalities in income and a continued deterioration of the global environment. A new General Assembly resolution, S19/2, promised further action. The Johannesburg Plan of Implementation, agreed at the World Summit on Sustainable Development, Earth Summit 2002, affirmed UN commitment to full implementation of Agenda 21, alongside achievement of the Millennium Development Goals and other sinister in nature and criminal in intent, international agreements. There are 40 chapters in the Agenda 21, divided into 4 main sections. Section 1, Social and Economic Dimensions, which deals with poverty, especially for developing countries, changing consumption patterns, promoting health, change population and installing sustainable settlement in localized decision-making. Section 2, Conservation and Management of Resources for Development, includes atmospheric poisoning, deforestation, taking control of fragile environments, conservation of biological diversity, biodiversity, control of population and management of biotechnology and radioactive wastes. Section 3, Strengthening the Role of Major Groups, includes the roles of children and youth, women, clubs, groups, organizations, fraternities, local authorities, business and workers, and determining the role of indigenous peoples in their community and farmlands. Section 4, Means of Implementation. Implementation includes science, technology transfer, education, international institutions and financial mechanisms. In the various subsections of the Agenda 21 document, the agenda will be carried out through a wide range of sub-programs, and various acts which will be enacted starting in all of the G8 countries. Agenda 21 is viewed by the American right as a plan to stealthily impose worldwide centralized control over people, attacking private property and energy usage. A resolution approved by the Republican National Committee on the 13th of January 2012 asserted that Agenda 21 is a comprehensive plan of extreme environmentalism, social engineering, and global political control. Ultimately, Agenda 21 is a globalist tool, empowering an ever-tightening stronghold the UN has on the entire world. It is turning the world's food supply over to Monsanto, the people that gave us Agent Orange, for their public debut. Get involved, ask questions, write your congressman, fight Agenda 21, and the banksters behind it. Before it is too late to fight, it's already too late to run. You are in it, like it or not. You only have to choose to have a voice, or not.
Now, Illuminati goals center around a few key objectives.
Agenda 21.
Among these was a rejection of the church as a suitable entity to run the state. Here we have a couple of the philosophers of the 1700s. I think the one on the right is Voltaire. I think the one on the left could be Pascal. I'm not 100% sure, but forgotten now. Anyway, they some of the key objectives, among which was rejection of the church as a suitable entity to run the state. They didn't believe the church was fit to run the affairs of state in Europe. And Weishaupt was, after all, an avid reader of works produced by the great movers of the French Enlightenment, such as these two. The monarchy, and monarchies in general, especially if they were influenced by the church, had in his mind to be overthrown if Europe was to truly break free of its religious past and secure French Enlightenment goals of an atheistic society that was free-thinking and open-minded about everything. As most of the freethinkers of the time were joining the Masonic lodges, Weishaupt also considered joining a lodge and began testing the waters by discussing his ideas about, well, his ideas that about the New Atlantis movement, all those things within those lodges, and about how governments must be changed in Europe. Now, finding that his ideas were not gaining traction within the lodges, he decided instead to form his own secret society. Given his personal interest in the esoteric sciences and the Kabbalah and in the Hermetic work, famous work that was then published called Mysteries of the Seven Sages of Memphis, Weishaupt started out with a society called the Golden Dawn. This soon changed its name to the New Atlantis movement, but because of the inspiration those in his movement were gaining from the Enlightenment and all the writers, the French writers at the time, they finally settled on the name Illuminati, which is to do with a direct link, of course, to the movement of the Enlightenment, meaning basically the same thing. But it was a secret Enlightenment, Enlightenment of the secret society. Now, his secret society was finally formed with a membership of 5 on the 1st of May, 1776, and we know that the 1st of May is now considered to be a high day among the occultists as well. Because one of its founding members was a Mason and also a person of considerable influence, Weishaupt allowed the new society to incorporate secret oaths, not unlike those of the Masons. So rather than just being a platform for discussion, it was truly became a secret society as well. Now, at that meeting, the founding members also laid out criteria for the kinds of people that should be allowed to join the order. The main criterion was that members should be well respected, well connected, and preferably quite wealthy. It was to be a club for the ruling class and for liberal intellectuals. The order's membership had 3 levels: novices, Minervals, and illuminated Minervals. Minerval referred to the Roman goddess of wisdom, Minerva, so they were getting trained up in secret knowledge and wisdom as they went up through the ranks. Now, after these small beginnings in 1776, and 5 people is not really much to speak of, really, but the order soon grew because of the kinds of people that were in it and the connections they had, and the secret order grew to about 600 members by 1782 and included an ex-Freemason, Baron Adolf von Knigge, and the banker Meyer Amschel Rothschild, who of course was pretty rich and provided funding for many of the programs that the secret society was trying to get underway. Of course, the semi-secret society also showed special deference to students of Weishaupt. He would protect them, at a personal level, and because many of the families whose families from whom his students came were also pretty rich and connected, because it was a fancy university. It was not long before there were noblemen, politicians, doctors, lawyers, jurists, philosophers, and writers on board, including Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Now, by the end of 1784, in fact, which is only a couple of years later than when it was at 600, the Illuminati had between 2,000 and 3,000 members on its books and growing. So there was a big burst of membership in those couple of years. Now, Baron von Knigge, and being a former Freemason, was very much in favour of adopting rites of passage from level to level, and the order started with rites that were very similar to those in Freemasonry. Many of the first Illuminists received a secret name from antiquity to characterize themselves. Weishaupt chose the name Spartacus, and Knigge was Philo. Membership, as I mentioned, was in levels. Originally 3 sort of levels, and each of those 3 levels was then further differentiated until there were 13 degrees of initiation. The first culminated in the degree of Illuminatus Minor, the second became Illuminatus Dirigens, and the third King. So there are 13 levels, which in a sense is also kind of a connection to the Kabbalistic use of the number 13, standing for rebellion and something spiritual disorder, which they probably saw themselves as doing. In the first class, each novice was initiated in humanitarian philosophy, as opposed to religious philosophy, until he became a Minerval. And people we saw before, like Voltaire and that, were people who were certainly champions of this kind of philosophy. When he became a Minerval, he then received the order's statutes and could attend meetings. So he couldn't actually attend any meetings until he had done that preliminary training. The second class degrees were inspired by Freemasonry. The Illuminatus Major supervised recruitment, and the Illuminatus Dirigens presided over the Minerval's meetings. And that's number 9 there. Now, members of the third class were priests who instructed lower degree members. The lower orders of this class were themselves under the authority of a king. So there was a priest, a prince, a magus, or a kind of wise one, a wise man, an astrologer, whatever, and a king. The overall directive of the order was to make political decisions that worked toward the following set of medium-term goals. The Illuminati do not like long-term goals, as motivation to achieve such goals is too low. They operate very much in the here and now. And judging by changes taking place in the world today, they're working quite actively on many fronts to push their agenda to the fore and finish their great work. So they started small, but they soon became quite big, and it seems to be almost an exponential growth of membership in this order. And I have friends who have actually received mail sometimes inviting them to join the Illuminati, whether I think it's probably genuine. So there's also Illuminati operating in New Zealand, for those who want. I don't know how you would contact them, but they could possibly contact you. They may know about you, they may be observing you, find out your address and send you a letter. Right, the Illuminists control their own members through spiritual and psychological control. They use occult magical practices, sexual compromise, involvement in horrific acts, and fear of horrible death. So they compromise you morally first. They can expose you for your crimes if you should want to break out of the order. Now, for obedience and success, however, in their missions, they shower their members with wealth and gifts, and with great success. They're keen to promote their best members to positions of significant public office. These same tactics of spiritual and psychological control, using a string of threats and fears for humanity, allow them to spread a veil of fear over their subject populations, so that Western governments remain dependent upon and subservient to them. And the things they're subservient and dependent upon are for money, weapons, technology, guidance, etc. Sometimes just for influence because of the connections within the orders. The culture of releasing terrifying revelations on YouTube, demanding radical and urgent action, comes largely from the disinformation experts who troll the social media on behalf of the Illuminati. Some of this is done by the CIA, which is also heavily infiltrated by their members. So it's quite a complicated web. Weishaupt's successor in 1834 was Giuseppe Mazzini, who was also a 33rd degree Mason. So this was a 33rd degree Mason taking over the reins of the Illuminati. And Giuseppe Mazzini was a 33rd degree Mason in the new 33 degree system of the Scottish Rite. And this was set up by Albert Pike. Mazzini was a close friend and admirer of the American Satanist Albert Pike, and later appointed Pike as sovereign pontiff of universal Freemasonry, and this made him the Freemasonic Pope. And so here we have an Illuminist setting up the structures within Freemasonry. He was able to appoint people to office within that society. And Pike became the coordinator of all US activities of the Illuminati. The link between the two movements is explicit in these two appointments, and it appears that his rank in the Freemasonic world is what allows him to also be the director of Illuminati operations in the most influential country in the world, the United States. But as its director, his goals will be clear, for Pike was an avowed Lucifer worshipper, and his plan for the future was to bring the world to its knees through world war or by any other means, not least of which could be a global financial collapse. We keep on reading about this sort of month after month in the YouTube videos that are being posted. Of course, financial collapse is always a possibility, or even a threat. But it could be, at a certain time, it could be a great tool for them to collapse society and sort of try to take over. Now, his motto, this is Pike's motto, was the famous Ordo ab chaos, meaning order out of the chaos. So the idea was to create a chaos and destruction and then try to rebuild it, a new society from that, a kind of phoenix-like re-emergence, but of a different kind. In 2018, the US and world economy is already actually on the brink of collapse and would already have collapsed if money printing were to cease. The Rothschilds, who have recently been selling all of their assets in America, and other New World Order agents have been trying to precipitate a financial collapse in the United States since Trump came to office, because of the threat of him exposing them all. While President Trump has instead been seeking to bring $21 trillion of lost public funds back to America, siphoned from the economy during the previous 4 presidencies. And I may add, in part, or a large part of it was stolen, in fact, by the Bushes. Anyway, I think recently he has actually recovered this money. Now, as a safety measure, many countries in 2017 signed up to the ASEAN Infrastructure Investment Bank, which promised to fund them in the event of a US dollar collapse in 2018. So obviously, a lot of them were expecting it to happen. Now, many of the Illuminati have also started setting up in South America, probably expecting this collapse in the US. But Trump is a powerful force, and he's got considerable influence also with those who are backing him. And so far he has managed to resist their attempts to collapse the American economy. But the link between universal Freemasonry and the Western Illuminati is quite explicit. Pike worshipped Lucifer as the true god of the world, but I think there's probably a lot of Freemasons who are still actually quite Christian in their beliefs and probably trying to forward a Christian agenda, so there's a real mixed bag there. Now, Pike actually was also, this is Mazzini, by the way, Pike was also a leader of the Ku Klux Klan, where he worked to keep blacks out of the Masonic lodges. It was Pike who had established the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry also, and he was the one that also wrote the letter to Mazzini in 1871, in which the goals of the 3 world wars were stated and the wars planned out in principle. And we're going to listen now to a clip from John Kennedy's famous speech. We played the video at a different time, but we're going to just play a couple of minutes of that speech again to remind ourselves of what he said about secret societies. So let's just pause for that.
But by 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower, upon leaving office, warned of the looming fascist threat of the military-industrial complex. And again in April 1961, newly elected President John F. Kennedy explicitly declared the growing national danger of secret societies.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
The famous speech of John F. Kennedy in 1961 was given not long before he was assassinated, probably, I think he was assassinated in 1963, but it was less than 2 years earlier. And John F. Kennedy had come to know about the great Illuminati threat. He may have received this news from high up in the Catholic Church to which he belonged. He spoke of a conspiracy so huge that no one could ever believe it possible to exist. He spoke of individuals and groups operating in the darkness of secrecy, but with an agenda of overthrowing the government. JFK had indicated his desire to cut loose from the Federal Reserve Bank, which was in fact a private bank drawing US citizens slowly into poverty. Kennedy had wanted to disband the CIA, which had been formed as a result of the Roswell incident in 1947, but which by the early 1960s had already become extremely corrupt and was heavily tied in with the Illuminati and with the shadow government. Basically, the CIA had gone rogue. He wanted to withdraw American troops from the poppy fields of Vietnam and elsewhere and stop angering the communists. Of course, the Americans were using their occupation of those lands to grow and transport drugs for sale as a great money-making venture for the secret government, not for the main government. He may not have known that drug sales were important for the budgets of black operations. He wanted transparent government that remained the true representation and representative of the people and not of some secret agenda. Now, with the assassination of JFK in 1963, it became clear that the Illuminati already held considerable sway in the workings of the American government. Just to pull off the killing of a president was itself involved quite a conspiracy of forces. And the fact that there was a cover-up, a successful cover-up of who really did it, proves the degree to which the government was already infiltrated by these shadow forces. It's generally believed today that the one ordering the assassination at the time was the father of the late Bush presidents, Preston Bush, or certainly working with the CIA head, Mr. Dulles. But George W. Bush was clearly identified as watching from the grassy knoll when the bullet killing JFK was fired from that same area. So I'm sure he knew all about it, and certainly didn't say anything about it. The Bush presidencies were part of keeping the Illuminati machine on track. And since the time of the Bushes, and probably even before, public truth is something that is being controlled by the shadow government and sort of a false media narrative, and it cannot really be trusted. In fact, some people today have given up entirely on the normal media and are completely getting their news from the alternative media, which I'm also starting to do lately. But one has to watch out because the CIA is busy spreading disinformation there as well to dirty the waters. Now, so many of these shootings in schools today and roadside bombings, like during the Boston Marathon and all that sort of thing, are actually just creations of the FBI and the American media. They are false flags, fake attacks designed to create outrage and fear, and prompting increased government control of security, information, and the populace, all so-called for the sake of our safety. Now, many of the victims were just actors and were very well paid for their lies. How many times have these attacks taken place on days when there was also scheduled to be some kind of a training exercise, which then turned live? The footage from the training exercises then became footage of the real live event because people had been dressed up with fake blood and everything else for their training exercise, and that could then be passed as the true results of a real bombing. The Illuminati like to signal also what they do. For instance, the bombing at the Boston Marathon occurred at 666 Boston Boulevard. Anyway, the Illuminati seem to be quite enlightened as far as contact with the occult goes, and this overlap of the occult with the Illuminati, with the Freemasons, with the Vatican, it's a real mixture, but there are definitely forces there that are occult forces, and that comes partly from the Kabbalistic readings and belief system that actually first attracted the Illuminati in the first place. I mean, Weishaupt was a great reader of the Kabbalah, and this must have been part of the Illuminati thinking from the beginning, and their interest in the occult would have been there from the start. Whereas with the Freemasons, it would have been slowly absorbed from the Illuminists, because they probably came more from a Catholic/Christian background when they started. Anyway, this contact with the occult seems to be a drawcard for many. Those who've left the Illuminati report being offered things like walk-in spirits, which can provide them with spiritual talents. And these are supposed to help them gain notoriety and influence in society. This invoking of spirits and the control of their movement also serves a dark spiritual agenda of deception. And the knowledge of how to invoke such spirits seems to go back to the spiritualist clubs of the late 1500s, to which the likes of John Dee and others belonged. In fact, John Dee was one of the people founding one of these clubs. Now, Shakespeare was another who dabbled in spiritism before he became a great playwright. The Jewish Kabbalah is also considered to be a pathway to accessing this world of gifting spirits. MK-Ultra and other modern mind control systems of the CIA and military also prepare recipients for evil spirits or to deliver programmed messages, but these are linked more to military and political objectives than public entertainment. But it's claimed that many performers have also sold their souls to the devil as part of their initiation to join the Illuminati and to gain access to these enabling spirits and to the success that the Illuminati can bring them. The Illuminati, of course, has a great deal of money at its fingertips, and this money is, of course, vital in promoting people to stardom. And because they own the media, of course, they also give them the media doorway to become well known. Now, singers and mediums are among the best known of those who have received occult gifts for the purpose of keeping the populace transfixed to their TVs and ready to receive subliminal and other messages from those controllers of the media, who are, for the most part, also from the Illuminati. With that situation, of course, it's never going to be easy to get the truth about the Illuminati, because they'll be running smoke screens all the way. Now, the technological advances springing from the world wars and the space between them fulfilled an occult quest, which goes right back to the time of the Egyptians, to obtain technological power from the dark divinities. Now, of course, in the beginning it might not have been technological power, it was just power, or the knowledge of how to obtain that power from the dark divinities, but such power would enable the Illuminists to rule the world on behalf of those divinities. The atomic bomb was celebrated as the ultimate demonstration of this new occult power. German scientists taken to the United States at the end of the war under Operation Paperclip brought with them UFO technology, or so it's called, supposedly recently disclosed to them by extraterrestrials. Now, this is probably another name actually for materialized forms of demonic entities or fallen angels. The occultists do make contact with these beings who are actually locked away from us for our safekeeping, and they ought not to be contacted, but the occult people do make this contact, and they get what's really an illicit contact with these forces. These forces then deceive them, representing themselves, for instance, as extraterrestrials, when in fact they are probably demonic entities. What's interesting about these demonic entities is they seem to have the power to actually materialize physically, or have learned that power or been given that power by humans. The reason that such entities may have appeared to the Germans was the intense interest that many of those in the leadership of the Third Reich already had in the occult, probably more than any other regime in history. They were quite fanatic about it, and they just about read every occult book in history, anything they could lay their hands on, in fact. They believed there was sort of secrets to power there that would help them to set up their Great Reich. The technology the Germans made available in the 1940s was called torsion technology, yet similar principles for manipulating the ether had already been explained by the Croatian genius Nikola Tesla in 1908. And later it was strong counter-rotating magnetic fields that drove the UFO technology forward. It seems that very strong fields rotating at very high rates in opposing directions cause a levitating effect. UFOs had 3 discs. Top and bottom discs were magnetized and spun at high speed in opposite directions, but the middle disc was at rest. What was also fascinating about the discs was that time was altered around them. When they operated, it ran much more slowly within the discs. Energy density was also altered around them, and they generated a parallel shell of existence that could, to some degree, slip against the normal world. There was sort of a time slippage effect created. So there's lots of interesting side technologies that sprung out of the UFO technology. Now, Tesla had developed a system to produce free energy to everyone around the world. We didn't have to pay these people every month for our power, but it was canned at the last minute because Tesla, unfortunately, explained that it could also be used as a weapon. Now, that would have possibly been a good selling point, one would have thought, but the government feared that the same technology, if it fell into enemy hands, could be a weapon used against the government. And many believe, actually, that the Tunguska Earth explosion in 1908 was actually a display by Tesla of using his technology as a weapon, which he probably performed at the request of government agents. Now, Tesla's book about how to extract free energy was published in 1900, but explicit diagrams were kept out of the book on request. The government kept the technology secret and stopped Tesla going independent with his work. But it seems that they probably were waiting for him to die so they could use it for themselves, and it's probably being used within the secret societies, but certainly, as we see, not publicly, at least not yet. UFO technology we see in America today stems then from the 1950s, but this advanced technology has been developed mainly in deeply classified programs, including DARPA, after World War II, and much of the testing now seems to be carried out in South American facilities. So where people are busy trying to find out what's going on in America, these people have cleverly shifted their real activities elsewhere. This control of the UFO technology is probably the most worrying aspect of Illuminati control, considering their rather dark objectives and goals for the world. And Putin and the Chinese mafia may be right in going after the Illuminati to rob them of this power. This is the power that makes victory for America in any war almost a certainty, unless they too have the technology, which it seems they haven't, despite sometimes media leaks that they also have this kind of technology and that it's a shared technology. But the way they're behaving, it seems maybe it isn't. Anyway, while Putin is following in the same has the same goals as the current President Trump does, which is sort of to dismantle the shadow government and to break away from this whole trajectory toward a new world order. I don't think we'll see a war between America and Russia, not in the meantime. But if Trump should ever go out of power and someone like the Democrats come back into power and go back to their new world order plans, I think we might see that Putin or whoever succeeds him will certainly turn their sights back on America and reinstitute the Cold War. But for now, I think we're safe. So with that last word, I think we will wrap up tonight. It's been a long session already. Thank you for listening. We've got plenty more on the Illuminati and Freemasonry in the next few sessions, so we'll see you back again next week, I hope, for more. And we'll continue in our push to understanding what's going on in the world today and how it all feeds into the Book of Revelation and what it tells us there and how things are going to come to a great climax. So until then, have a great week. God bless you all, and goodbye. See you next week.